and welcome to School of Dàimh Homeschooling. If you're looking to improve your session skills, learn some tunes and a Gaelic song, then you've come to the right place. Here's how these lessons are going to work. First of all, you'll hear the guys playing through a tune, and then either Angus, Alistair or Gabe will teach it to you. Then we'll hand over to either Ross or Yogi who'll take you through the chords. Following that, everyone will play all together at full speed. Finally, you'll hear the melody without the accompaniment so that the chord players can try out some of their own variations. You can pause this video at any time and you can skip through any boring bits, like this whole intro maybe. Now, 3 things to remember, so I hope you're paying attention. Have a great time. Play like no one is listening, and like and subscribe. So, let's dive right in. Here's Gabe and Yogi teaching Mary's Fancy.
Right folks, we're going to have a play through Mary's Fancy with Gabe.
Mary's Fancy after 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a tune that's comprised of 2 parts, each of which is 8 bars repeated, or 4 phrases repeated. So the first phrase in the A part, the first part, that first 2 bars are so that very first bar, or the first half of that first phrase, is once more. And then the second bar, the second half of that first phrase is, and one more time. So the whole first phrase is, and then the second phrase, or the second half of that first line, is, so the third bar in that first line, or the first half of the second phrase, is, one more time, and the second half of that second phrase is, and once more. So that whole second phrase, second half of the first line, is, so then the third phrase, or the first half of the second line, is, which is exactly the same as the first phrase again, so it's just that very first bit again. And then the last phrase, the very last 2 bars in that first part, are, so the third bar of that second line, or the first half of that very last phrase, is, and one more time. And then that very last bar is just, and once more. So that whole last phrase is, then the only difference there is in the repeat. So once you've played the first part and you're going back to play it again, for the repeat, instead of finishing on the E at the end, it's a D. So let's have a crack at that whole first part twice through. So with the E at the end the first time and D at the end the second time. So after 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The second part of this tune is quite heavy on the triplets. You could look at it as just a bunch of triplets with a few melody notes chucked in to justify them. So a good opportunity for practicing your triplets. So again, like the first part, it's 8 bars repeated or 4 phrases repeated. So the first phrase of which is so the first half of that first phrase, or the first bar, is so it's just C, E, and then a couple of triplets on the A, so once more. And then the second bar is D and F, and then the triplets are on B. One more time. So that whole phrase is and then the second phrase is so the first half of that phrase, or the first bar, the third bar in that first line of the second part, is just exactly the same as the first bar in the first phrase. So it's just that bar again, and then the second bar in that phrase, or the last bar in that line, is one more time. So that whole second phrase in the second part is and then the first phrase in the last line, or the third phrase in that second part, again it starts off the same as the other two phrases, but the second bar is a bit different. So the whole phrase is so that first half of that third phrase is just the same as the other two again. Just that bar again. But then the second half of that third phrase this time is so once more. And then the very last phrase in that second part is so the first half of that very last phrase is, and one more time, and then the very last bar is once more. So the whole last phrase so let's have a crack at that whole second part then a couple of times around. Twice around the B part then, after 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello folks, we're here to have a look at the chords for Mary's Fancy. Hopefully you've just had a wee tutorial video there with Mr. Gabe McVarish, and we can call this video Part A. We'll go over the chords for the first part in this one. So the first part is a bit that goes like this. So, if we sort of think of our first phrase, our first phrase only has two chords, and the first one is A. The tune is in the key of A, and basically you don't change chord till just the very last second of the phrase. So it goes A, and then we go to D. And it's very obvious where the change is. You can kind of hear it in the tune, and this is where it's kind of important to maybe have a listen to the tune before you try this out. But it's A for this whole section that goes. But then when it hits the F sharp, that's when we're playing the D. So it goes. Cool. So the second phrase, it continues with the D from sort of landing on it early. So it goes. So that's the bit that goes. And then the second chord in our second phrase is G. So that would be, and there's kind of an obvious where the melody plays the G is where you change. There it is. So that would be 1 through our first part. So we'll try and do that. So it goes 1, 2. And like I was saying, the tune is in the key of A. So actually, some of the G's that we could play with the A bass running through it. So we could have. Yeah. And then on the repeat of the first part, it just goes. So it's exactly the same up until that point where you would nearly change to G. And you do change G. You play G, but it doesn't last for as long, and then you play a quick A to finish off the part. So the whole part, the whole way around, goes like this. And there's our chords for the first part of Mary's Fancy. Okay folks, we're going to have a slow play through part A now with Mr. Gabe McVarish.
So after 4, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello folks, welcome back to part B of Chords for Mary's Fancy. The part B sounds like this. It goes... So, in many ways, this part's a wee bit easier, because you just kind of have to think of everything in doubles, or in pairs, or 2 strums to each sort of wee section. The first sort of phrase of the tune goes... So that's just 2 A's. And then we've kind of got a B minor chord in the melody notes, but we're kind of keeping the A bass running through the sort of the chords as well. So we've just been sliding up and having the A over the B. So you, for the first 4 chords, you have... Yeah, so A for 2, A over B for 2, and then the melody goes back to the first phrase. So back to start, and then we've got our sort of ending phrase, and that's just down to G, or as we've been doing, keeping that A bass running through it and having G on the high strings. So that's for 2 as well. So you're halfway through the second part, you would have 2 A's, 2 A over B's, back to 2 A's, and then 2 G's. So we'll try that together before we do the last wee section. After 2, 1, 2. Yeah, so that's halfway through the second part, and then we've got quite a lot of repetition. It just goes back to the A's for the... and then back to the A over B's for the... but then it changes here. So we're going for 2 G's, and then a D and an A to finish off the part. So your second time through the second part has two A's to begin with, and then up to B, down to G, then A, So, let's try our chords for the whole B part of Mary's Fancy. There we go. Chords for Mary's Fancy. Good luck. Okay, folks, we're going to have a play through part B of Mary's Fancy with the fiddle now.
Twice round the B part then, after 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4.